How Books Work, Real Talk with editors, agents, and publishing insiders. Hosted by writers Julie Satow and Alice Robb.
Today we're talking with Jane Dystel, one of the most respected literary agents in the business and president of Dystel, Goderich Bourret. Jane comes from publishing royalty. Her father was president of Bantam Books for 30 years, but she originally wanted nothing to do with the industry. After a brief stint in law school and dreams of broadcast journalism, she ended up at Bantam, earning $85 a week for what was supposed to be a temporary job. 50 years later, she's still here. In this episode, Jane shares the brutal realities behind big book deals, including why she sometimes tells authors to turn down large advances. She talks about why social media numbers matter less than they used to, and her strategy for reviving authors' careers, sometimes advising writers to switch genres, or even names. We ask her how she came to represent Colleen Hoover, and she tells us why she rarely takes on self-published authors these days. Jane also gets candid about a question every author should ask themselves. Would you rather have great reviews or great sales? Her answer might surprise you.
So I should just tell all the listeners that Jane is the mom of one of my very close and oldest friends, an amazing journalist, Jessica Tunkel for the Wall Street Journal. So Jane, you come from a long line of publishing people. I didn't realize that your father was a founder of Bantam Books until I...
Well, he wasn't a founder.
Oh, okay. Tell me about this.
He was the president of Bantam Books for 30 years. And brought it from, a sort of middling paperback publishing company to the top publishing company and the paperback publishing company in the world. At the time, most of the time that he was there, publishing was not vertical. Publishers did not publish all formats. There were the hardcover publishers and there were the paperback publishers. And Bantam Books was one of the paperback publishers.
It's interesting. Actually, one of our podcast episodes we were thinking about doing was the history of paperbacks. Remember, Alice? We talked about that.
Yeah.
Such an interesting history. So did you always know you wanted to to be in publishing then?
No, actually, I wanted to not be in publishing. I went to law school for a year and decided that was not for me and wanted to be a broadcast journalist. But after I left Georgetown, I didn't quite know, I was applying for jobs and, I had no qualifications. I mean, I just had a year of law school. I had a very good academic record in college, but I couldn't do anything. And so I wanted to be in broadcast journalism. So I did apply for jobs, but while I was waiting, I couldn't sit still. So unbeknownst to my father, I approached Mark Jaffe, who was then the editor-in-chief at Bantam, and asked him if I could have a job there temporarily until I found something else. And they offered me $75 a week, and I turned them down. And they offered me $85 a week, and I said yes. Now, Bantam and all the paperback publishers at the time were doing reprints. So they would buy the paperback rights from hardcover publishers and publish those. But Bantam did have a very, very small division that did original paperbacks, mostly for schools and libraries, mostly academic subjects. And that's where I worked. So I was never in the reprint part of the company. I was only in original publishing. And probably about 6 weeks later, CBS offered me a job in their legal department as an assistant for $90 a week or something. And I went to Mark and I said, okay, I'm leaving. And he said, you can't, we'll offer you $95 a week. So I did stay at Bantam, working in that original publishing division as an assistant, editorial assistant, for a number of years. And then at Bantam, I created their permissions department, buying the rights to reprint photographs and poetry and lyrics and things like that. And I was there for a total of 5 years.
So you were always a deal maker, it sounds like, even from the very beginning, you were good at negotiating.
I was okay. Yeah. I was
And
okay.
starting salaries in publishing have only gone up a little bit.
That's right. Well, actually, recently they've gone up nicely.
Well, for those of us who represent Colleen Hoover, maybe.
We actually want to ask you about paperbacks because it seems like the kind of role of the paperback has been changing so much even in the last handful of years. And now, I mean, even just as a buyer, as a reader, buying a book, buying a hardcover is often cheaper than buying a paperback. And so many paperback releases have been canceled that the paperback has almost become this new symbol of prestige, it seems like.
I don't know. I mean, because of ebooks, the paperback has come in and out, and I know that my clients prefer to be published in hardcover. And it's still true that hardcovers are reviewed more than paperbacks, and that's a big deal, especially for beginning authors. Those reviews are very, very important because oftentimes the sales aren't so hot, but the reviews are very important for their ongoing career.
In nonfiction, it seems like, at least, and I know it's different obviously with fiction, and you do such a broad variety of authors and genres, but for nonfiction, there have been cases now where if the hardcover doesn't sell as well, they just decide not to go forward with the paperback at all. So I think that's what, like maybe Alice meant with like prestige. Like if you actually get a paperback, that kind of is an indication that your book is doing well enough to warrant one. Yeah.
I mean, I have a kind of a good story about that. I represent a wonderful writer named Dan Fagan, and he wrote a book many years ago called Tom's River. And we sold it to Bantam, actually. And it took him quite a while to write this book. I mean, we're talking years and years. And the book was published in 2013. And the publisher told him that a year after it was published in hardcover, it was going to be published in paperback, and that they wanted him to do an epilogue, which he did do. And then in the fall of 2013, they told him the hardcover hadn't sold well enough, so they were not going to do the paperback. And that was really, really upsetting. So we got the paperback rights back from the publisher, but they wouldn't give us the ebook rights back. But I did manage to sell the paperback rights to Island Press. And this was now in March of 2014. Dan was sitting with the contract from Island Press on his desk when we heard that he had won the Pulitzer Prize, which was pretty incredible. And Random House was great about it. They said that it wasn't even on their radar. I mean, it just wasn't. So they will never give up paperback rights again.
Wow. It's interesting. That shows how sales doesn't necessarily correspond to, you know,
No,
awards
no, not
or
at
any of
all.
that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that book didn't get one bad review. I mean,
Yeah.
the reviews were spectacular.
That's amazing.
Do you think, is it possible to say, I mean, I'm just curious, like, so let's say you're a newish writer, your first or second book, and you could choose between having either great reviews or great sales. The devil came and offered you a bargain. Which would you take?
Great sales. Yeah. I mean, the reviews can be for the future,
Yeah.
but, in terms of, uh, the future, next books,
Mhm.
you really want those sales first.
Yeah, Alice and I have talked in previous episodes and between ourselves how hard it can be sometimes when a publisher is very excited, they give you a really big advance, and so there's so much pressure on you for those sales, and it's really even if you make the bestseller list, it can be really hard sometimes to make back your advance, and so it kind of puts you at this disadvantage, and you can't really say no to a large advance either, so you're sort of in this conundrum with that. Do you have thoughts about that? I wonder, do you ever tell an author not to take the bigger deal, or I don't know?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
do.
Oh, I do. Yeah. I mean, if it matters, the chemistry between the author and the editor, in my opinion, is very important. Also, the publisher, are they gonna promote the book, in my experience, to make it into a book that sells a lot of copies? The whole idea is to earn out that advance. Because if you're way under earnout, the likelihood of you getting that advance again or something bigger is remote. It's not going to happen. So you wanna be very, very careful about accepting a huge advance unless you don't really have any desire to build your career. Because I mean, very often these big advances do not earn out very often.
So, on the subject of advances, I mean, have you noticed in the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, like publishers being more conservative with those advances for untested authors? It seems like for a while there was a trend of debut authors getting huge advances that they then couldn't really earn out, and then, having to kind of rebuild their careers from a lower point. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. There was a time 13 or 14 years ago, I remember it very well, when I represented a bunch of formerly self-published authors and who were now publishing traditionally for the first time and getting seven-figure advances, but only for one or two books. And then it was over. I mean, they couldn't, the books were not earning out, not even close. And frankly, having been on the publishing side for as long as I was, that was not a surprise to me. I knew they were overpaying. With most of them, not with all of them, but with most of them. And I have found that other than for, the big names, the advances are down.
In all genres, fiction, nonfiction, or are we talking mostly nonfiction?
No, we're not talking mostly nonfiction. A lot in nonfiction though, because fiction is, especially for debut, if somebody gets really excited about a book, it's going to push up that advance. It is. But with nonfiction, people are being more careful.
So sometimes, there's this idea that if they've offered a large advance, they're going to put a lot into the publicity and really invest in the book. Is that a myth? Is there really not a lot of, correspondence between your advance size and how much they'll do for you?
I don't think it's a myth. I mean, the publisher would be nuts not to support what they're doing here. I mean, unless they've really, really guessed wrong and the advance orders are very low. But when you pay a lot of money for a book, you're gonna do a lot more in terms of marketing in advance and creating buzz to make that book sell well in pre-orders as well as on publication.
In terms of getting that advance, I think a lot of our listeners are interested in proposals and kind of how proposals are changing. And I was curious, from your vantage point, like what kinds of trends are you seeing in proposals? Do they have to be longer now as publishers are more risk averse, or as more about platform, less about proposal? Or
Well, I am finding that, first of all, I haven't changed the format of our proposals or my proposals ever. And I don't really care how long it is. As a matter of fact, if it's very long, I discourage that, because, editors, especially these days when there are fewer and fewer of them, have less and less time to read a proposal and make up their minds. So as long as all the elements that I want to see in a proposal are there, I don't care how long it is. I mean, obviously the sample chapter has to be very similar in length to a real sample chapter. But marketing and comparative and even the keynote phrase all has to be something that is easily digestible, and the editor can say, oh yes, yeah. I haven't found that proposals have changed at all. I think in terms of social media, that has become a little less important. Platform's important, depending upon what the subject is. But those huge social media numbers don't seem to matter as much anymore.
I've been hearing kind of the same thing a lot about reviews. You mentioned hardcover, gets more reviews, but I've been hearing a lot that reviews really are not translating into sales either. You can get great reviews and, it's not really moving the number in terms of sales. Is that?
Well, that might be true for the book, that's being published. But if you're going forward with a second or third or fourth book, and you don't have the sales, then the reviews do matter. That's really what I mean. If you don't have either, you're cooked. Then it's hard. Then it's very challenging.
can you, I mean, to the extent that you can share, like, can you think of a time that you did revive someone's career after they had no sales and no reviews? Did it involve switching genres, like remarketing them, trying a different publisher?
Well, I'm doing that now. I can't really tell you who I'm doing it with, but I'm doing it with an author of YA fiction, very interesting YA fiction that has, and it's been published by a very prestigious publisher, and her reviews have been really, really fabulous. All kinds of stars here and there. She's won all kinds of awards, and her sales are shockingly poor.
Hmm.
So we're gonna change her genre. She's gonna become an adult novelist. She's a very, very good writer. And you know, we were all, including her publisher, surprised. Now she's not going back to her publisher because that was YA. We're gonna start from scratch and hope. You know, it doesn't always work, but she has been so well received critically that and her writing is so good that we're really hoping that this works. It's, you know, it's a crapshoot. And sometimes I mean, it used to be that we asked them to change their name.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm doing that a little less. But yeah, that can happen too.
That's so, you've seen so much over all your many years of experience. I wonder, like, has it changed what you are looking for when you're signing new writers or even in, your current client list? I don't know.
Well, a little bit, for sure. I mean, you know, I'm aware of trends just like everybody else is. But in the end, what I'm looking for are two things. First and foremost, good writing, really good writing. And secondly, original ideas. I mean, especially with commercial fiction, I find there's a shocking lack of originality in the submissions I receive. I mean, I'm seeing the same idea over and over and over again. Originality is super important. And I mean, as I've gone on in my career, maybe it's just because, you know, I've read so much that I'm more aware of a lack of originality. I don't know, but you know, those two things have never changed, for sure. And my enthusiasm for good writing has not changed. I'm just always delighted when I read something I just last week read a novel that was just gorgeous, and am hoping that writer comes with us.
Speaking of commercial fiction and originality, you famously represent Colleen Hoover. And we were curious, how you see self-publishing and all of this, and, do you think there's more originality coming through that route? And yeah, how do you go about how did she come across your radar? Or other self-published authors, yeah.
Colleen was recommended to me by another one of my self-published authors years and years ago, you know, right after 50 Shades of Grey was published. A lot of people assumed that was self-published initially. It was not. It was published initially by a very small New Zealand publisher and then picked up by Knopf, by Anne Massetti. But she had a lot of friends who were self-published, young women, and I picked up a couple of them who, as self-published authors, had made the New York Times bestseller list. And as a result of that, and what I said to those authors was, I understand you want to remain self-published, but what we'll do is we'll represent your audio and your translation and British rights sales and your film rights sales. And then if you decide that you want to be traditionally published, you agree to come with us. And so at one point I represented 35 of these women. And one of my very early clients recommended Colleen to me. And that's how that happened. And you know, we sold her first book to Atria for quite a lot of money. All of these, when they went traditionally, they all went for a lot of money. Colleen was one of the very first publishers where it stuck, where the originality of her stories and the writing really attracted a huge number of readers, whereas many of the others did not work. And as I said just a little while ago, and many of those writers have gone back to self-publishing. And then, you know, after this phenomenon happened, everybody wanted to get into the self-publishing game. And that really, really spoiled the whole self-publishing thing, because consumers were unable to tell what was good and what wasn't good. And there was a lot of garbage being self-published.
There's always sort of I don't know, some, you know, attitude, gatekeeping, whatnot, between the, like, you know, big five publishers. And let's say if you've been self-published in the past and trying to make that transition, do you think that's still there then, or has that changed? Or when you're trying to make a deal with a self-published author, let's say, bring them into the publishing sphere?
I mean, I frankly, as a policy, unless a self-published author today has a really strong sales record, really strong, I won't pick them up, because it's not going to work. Publishers are just not wanting to publish formally self-published authors, books that have already been published. And even subsequent books, if the self-published books didn't become bestsellers, they just don't want to take the risk because of what happened 12 and 13 years ago.
I also wonder, you do so many deals. We were looking at Publishers Marketplace before our interview, and you've done, I think, 24 deals in the last 12 months. How do you and there's such a wide variety, as I mentioned earlier, you know, so many agents kind of pick a lane. They do nonfiction, sports, or whatever, literary fiction. Why do you do such a broad variety, and how do you keep up with all that pace? How do you make sure your clients get attention? How do you do it?
Well, I work all the time. I mean, that's that, and I love what I do. And I don't know how that works. I love what I do, so I work all the time, or I work all the time and I love what I do. And I for the most part, pick up to represent what I love, what I like in terms of subject matter, and yes. So years ago, when I was starting out, there was a time when I represented cookbooks almost exclusively. And I mean, I represented some very big names. People would come to me because they knew that I was the cookbook agent. And then, as a result of the clients and the cookbook editors becoming not very nice, I decided I didn't want to live like that anymore. So I got out of that publishing category, but it was very, very difficult, because I'd been typecast as this cookbook agent. Now, this week, I will sell a cookbook, a debut cookbook. If I read something that I think, again, is an original idea, well done, then I'm going to pick it up if I can. And the reason for the variety of stuff I do is because I can, because I'm fortunate enough to be able to represent a whole wide swath of books. I mean, I represent sports books, I represent history, I represent politics, I represent cookbooks. I do not personally anymore represent practical nonfiction other than cookbooks. Stacy Glick here does a lot of that. But and that's an area where I don't know the editors who do it, and I know well enough to stay away from that. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, for sure. I had one more proposal question that I should have asked earlier when we were discussing proposals, but for established authors, who are working on their second book, let's say, or third book, fourth book, do you suggest, we've heard all over the place about this, so I'm curious what you think, about writing a full proposal. If you're working with, the same agents, like the same editors, rather, you've worked with before, you're doing another book, do you typically think that authors should go through the whole full proposal experience each time, or does it become more of like a casual thing where you can write an overview, let's say, and move on from there?
Well, if the author is going to be working with an editor that they've worked with before, we know that the contract is going to call for a certain amount of material in the proposal, but oftentimes I will, no matter what the contract says, I will say to the author, let's just do the overview and let's do the annotated table of contents. And the reason why I say that is because, why I think that table of contents is important is because it's a blueprint for what you're going to do. And if you sell a book without it, I recently sold a book just from a conversation, and this is going to be a first book for this client. He did collaborate on a book before, but this is the first book for him. And I've learned the hard way that when you sell a book just from a conversation, you can be in big trouble. When you turn in a manuscript, you don't know what you promised. The editor doesn't know what you promised. It could be a disaster. So I always ask for that annotated table of contents so that blueprint is there. And if the author wants to change it, they can talk to their editor after there's a contract and get approval of that. But certainly with subsequent books, I try to get away with not doing that sample chapter because it's onerous. There's no question.
Yeah, it's never that fun to do work on spec. I am curious, you must do such an enormous amount of reading for your work. Do you read for fun? And how do you differentiate it from your work reading?
I read very little for fun because I have very little time. But I like to read what's popular so that I can learn the kinds of things that is trending and that I can represent. Right now, for pleasure, I'm actually reading one of my agent's novels, just to find out about that. And I listen for pleasure to nonfiction. So I read for pleasure fiction and I listen for pleasure nonfiction. And that way, I learn what's trending. Yeah, but I don't do either a lot. I mean, I tend to read fiction for pleasure right before I go to sleep. I tend to listen to nonfiction while I'm driving, sometimes while I'm getting a manicure. Yeah, but I don't have a lot of time. There's no question about it. And it's too bad, but it's fine.
Can we ask what nonfiction, and I guess you mentioned what fiction you're listening to. What about nonfiction? What are you doing for fun right now? Or have you
I'm
read something
reading,
good?
I'm listening to Care and Feeding, which I'm right at the end. I have no idea how she's still alive. But but she is. Um, and then I'm going to be listening to Molly Young fast after that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, my husband has Alzheimer's, so I'm very interested in what she has to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I really want to read that book too. Well, thank you so much, Jane. This was so great. We so appreciate you taking the time and sharing your wisdom. It's really so helpful to us. And I'm sure all the writers and aspiring writers out there listening will really enjoy it. So thank
I
you.
hope so. I hope so. Thanks so much for asking, Julie. I really am very honored
Oh,
to have been able to make a small contribution.
oh, well, thank you, Jane.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of How Books Work. Join us on our next episode as we continue to explore publishing behind the scenes.